All right, today we are digging into a question of identity, one that stretches back thousands of years. Who were the ancient people of Britain? Now, the answer seems pretty obvious, right? They were Celts. But what if I told you that simple fact has been at the center of a huge historical debate? You've seen it everywhere, I'm sure, in history books, documentaries, pretty much anywhere you look. The ancient people who lived in the British Isles were Celts. For most of us, this is just a settled piece of history, something we take for granted. But here's where it gets interesting. Starting not that long ago, really, a lot of leading experts began to say, hang on a second. They argued this whole idea, this connection between ancient Britons and Celts was actually a modern invention. And their reason? There was just no ancient proof to back it up.
So, how did something so fundamental to British history suddenly get called into question? How did we end up with a full-blown identity crisis? Well, this is where our little investigation really kicks off.
The whole problem really boils down to this. If you go through all the writings of the ancient Greeks and Romans, you won't find a single one that clearly says the people living in Britain are Celts. Not one. It's this huge, frustrating silence from the past that left the door wide open for all this doubt. So you have to wonder, right? If no ancient historian ever made the link, where on earth did the idea even come from? Well, the answer isn't in some dusty old history book, but in the languages that are still spoken today in Britain and Ireland. Okay, let's jump way forward in time. I'm talking nearly 2,000 years forward, to the 17th century. There was this absolutely brilliant Welsh linguist named Edward Llwyd, and as he was studying the native languages of the British Isles, he spotted something that would completely change how we see the past. Llwyd's logic was actually pretty straightforward. First, he showed that languages like Welsh, Cornish, and Irish were all clearly related, part of the same family. Then he traced that family tree all the way back to the Celtic languages spoken over on the European continent. So the conclusion seemed obvious. If the people spoke Celtic languages, then their ancestors must have been Celts. And boom, just like that, the modern view was born. But, for a lot of historians, a link based on language made almost 2 millennia after the fact, well, it just wasn't enough. It felt like circumstantial evidence. What they needed was a witness from the time, someone who had actually been there and seen it with their own eyes. And believe it or not, we have one. His name was Pytheas. He was a Greek explorer from what is now Marseille in France. Way back in the 4th century BC, he sailed up into the cold northern seas and became the only writer we know of who actually visited and described Britain before Julius Caesar showed up centuries later. His account is, well, it's literally priceless. Okay, so here's the catch, and it's a huge one. Pythias's original book, it was called On the Ocean, is completely lost to history. Not a single copy survived. So if his actual testimony is gone, how in the world can he be the key to solving our mystery? Well, it's true we can't read Pythias's own words, but what we can do is follow the breadcrumbs he left behind, these faint little clues that got preserved in the works of other writers, people who quoted him centuries later. It's like historical detective work. The chain of evidence is kind of like a game of historical telephone. It's a bit wild. So first, you have Pythias in the 4th century BC making his notes. 200 years later, the famous astronomer Hipparchus uses Pythias's geographical data in his own work. Then, another 100 years after that, a geographer named Strabo quotes Hipparchus. Our one tiny clue has to survive that entire journey. And here's the final, absolutely maddening twist. Strabo, the guy at the end of the chain, the one who holds our clue, he didn't even trust Pythias, not one bit. He thought the far north was frozen and uninhabitable, and he basically thought Pythias was a total fraud. So he quotes him, but mainly to try and prove him wrong. For a long time, this whole situation just seemed like a dead end. But really recently, some incredible new research, particularly from the Celtic expert Patrick Sims-Williams, has gone back to these ancient skeptical writings and found the answer hidden inside them all along. Now, to find this answer, we need to know one key word. It's Keltoi. That's simply the word the ancient Greeks used for the people we call the Celts. Okay? Just remember that word, Keltoi. So, get this. While Strabo is busy trying to debunk Pythias's solar measurements, he quotes Hipparchus, who is describing the people who live about halfway up the island of Britain. And the name that Hipparchus uses for those people? Keltoi. He calls them Celts. Right there, in black and white. So the big question is, why didn't this solve the whole debate years ago? Well, for the most part, scholars kind of put people in boxes. They saw Hipparchus as the astronomer and Strabo as the geographer. So when it came to geography, they just trusted Strabo more. They saw this reference and basically shrugged, assuming it was just a simple mistake made by the astronomer. But here is the absolutely crucial point, the thing that changes everything. Hipparchus wasn't just making a wild guess. All of his information about Britain, the latitudes, the solar angles, and yes, the names of the people, it all came from one place, the original report from Pytheas. This wasn't Hipparchus's error, it was Pytheas's direct eyewitness observation.
And that's what makes this so incredibly powerful. Think about it. We have exactly one first-hand account from Britain in this entire period. Just one. And that single account, passed down through a chain of historians who didn't even believe it, tells us that the people living there were known as Celts.
So it really does seem like the ancient Britons were called Celts after all. The case is stronger than it's ever been. But it leaves us with this incredible thought, doesn't it? It makes you wonder, how many other historical truths are just sitting there, hidden in plain sight, just waiting for someone to look at them in a new way?